Hello, friends. A warm welcome to Next Page Wisdom. Today, we're going to talk about the book Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. Have you ever wondered why there is so much inequality in the world today? Why are some countries so rich and powerful while others struggle with poverty and hardship? Why did the people of Europe and Asia rule most of the world, while the native people of the Americas, Africa, or Australia could not? Is the reason hidden in people's intelligence or their race? Or is there some deeper and unseen truth behind it? Jared Diamond, in this remarkable book, digs into these very questions. Now, he takes us on a journey that begins 13,000 years ago, when all humans were equals. Everyone was a hunter. Then, step by step, he uncovers the reasons why some societies gained power through guns, germs, and steel, while others did not. This book permanently changes the way we look at our history. It is not just the story of one nation or one people. It is the story of all humanity. So come with me on this fascinating and enlightening journey as we search for answers to humanity's biggest questions. Chapter 1. The question that changed history. Why did some societies move ahead while others were left behind? Many years ago, a scientist named Jared Diamond was researching birds in the jungles of New Guinea. There he met a local leader named Yali. Yali was a very intelligent and curious man. One day, while the two were sitting together, Yali asked Jared a very simple but deep question. He asked, "You white people have so many things, so much cargo that you bring here. Why do we New Guineans have almost nothing of our own?" By cargo, Yali meant things like steel axes, clothes, medicines, matches, and all the modern goods that came from the Western world. But his question was not just about objects. It was about power, technology, and wealth. What he was really asking was, why has your world developed so much while ours has remained behind? This question struck Jared Diamond deeply. It wasn't an easy question. For centuries, people had tried to answer it, but most answers were either wrong or dangerous. Some believed the reason was race, that some races were naturally more intelligent than others. But Jared Diamond, who had lived among New Guineans for years, knew this was absolute nonsense. He had seen with his own eyes that New Guineans were not less intelligent. In fact, in terms of surviving in their environment, they were probably far more resourceful, alert, and knowledgeable than Westerners. They knew thousands of trees, plants, and animals. They could survive in the jungle without any modern tools. So intelligence could not be the answer. So then, what was the real reason? What invisible force had bent the course of history in this way? To find the answer, Jared Diamond asked us to travel far back in time, about 13,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. At that time, no matter where in the world humans lived, Europe, Asia, Africa, or the Americas, there were no significant differences among them. Everyone lived in the same way, as hunter-gatherers. That meant they hunted animals and gathered roots, fruits, and plants from the forests to survive. They used small stone and bone tools and lived in small tribes. There were no kings, no empires, no cities, and no written language. At that time, all of humanity was one and the same. At the starting line of history, everyone was equal. Nobody had any real advantage. So if in the beginning all were equal, then how did such a massive gap appear later? What happened over the next 11,000 years that some societies remained hunter-gatherers while others learned to farm, built great cities, established empires, and developed technologies that allowed them to conquer the entire world? Yali's question now became the question of all humanity. It was not just a question between white and black people, but also why civilizations in China and the Middle East advanced so far, while those in the Americas or Australia remained behind in that era. This question takes us toward a puzzle whose pieces are scattered across the world's geography, plants, animals, and even diseases. Jared Diamond argues that the root cause of inequality lies not in the people themselves, but in their environment. It is not a story of race, but a story of geography. Some continents were gifted by nature with advantages that others simply did not have, and those advantages permanently changed the course of history. It wasn't anyone's fault, nor anyone's greatness. It was simply a geographic lottery, in which some continents hit the jackpot and others were left with nothing. The first and most important prize in this lottery was the ability to farm, an invention that transformed humans from hunters into farmers and gave them the power to stay in one place. But why didn't everyone win this lottery? Why did farming begin only in a few places while most of the world remained without it? The first and most important part of this puzzle lies in answering that very question. So what happened that some people remained hunters while others eventually reached the moon? The first piece of this puzzle is hidden in our next chapter. Chapter 2. The Magical Invention of Farming. How wheat and cattle wrote the destiny of the world. Imagine yourself as a human 13,000 years ago. Your entire life revolves around one thing: food. Every morning you wake up with the same question: what will we eat today? You and your tribe wander for miles, following herds of animals, or searching the forest for edible plants. Sometimes you find plenty of food. Sometimes you go hungry for weeks. Your life is full of uncertainties. You cannot build a permanent home because you must always move in search of food. Your population cannot grow very much either, because any one area can only provide a limited amount of animals and plants to eat. This was the life of our ancestors for thousands of years. Then, in one small part of the world, something happened that changed everything. Humans made a revolutionary discovery: farming. The invention of farming was perhaps the single most important event in human history. It didn't happen in a single day, but was a slow process that took thousands of years. Yet its impact was so deep that it transformed our way of life completely. Now humans no longer had to wander for food. They could grow crops in one place and stay there. This meant a more stable life. They could build villages, houses, and most importantly, farming gave humans something they had never had before: food surplus. A hunter could only eat what he hunted that day, but a farmer could grow enough food to last for months or even years. This food surplus became the foundation stone upon which the modern world was built. So the biggest question is, why did farming begin only in a few special places? Jared Diamond explains that the reason was not human intelligence, but the types of plants and animals available in those regions. The fate of plants and animals played a decisive role. To practice farming, you need plants that can be easily cultivated, provide high nutrition, and can be stored for a long time. The world had thousands of wild plants, but only a few had all these qualities. And by luck, the best of these plants grew abundantly in a very specific part of the world that we today call the Fertile Crescent, the region of the Middle East that includes modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. Here grew the wild ancestors of wheat and barley, which became the most important grains of our world. These plants were easy to grow and improve. But plants alone weren't enough. To build a successful agricultural society, domestication of animals was just as crucial. Animals didn't just provide meat. They also gave milk, wool, and most importantly, power to plow the fields. Imagine how difficult it would be to till land without oxen. Horses gave humans unprecedented speed in travel and warfare. Although the world had hundreds of species of large mammals, only 14 species were ever domesticated on a large scale. Out of these 14, 13 belonged to Eurasia, the massive landmass of Europe and Asia. Cows, sheep, goats, pigs, horses all originated there. By contrast, the entire American continent had only one large domesticable animal, the llama, found in a small part of the Andes. Africa and Australia had none at all. Zebras could never be domesticated, and kangaroos could not plow fields. This was an enormous geographic lottery. The people of the Fertile Crescent had won it. They had the best plants and the best animals. As a result, they became successful farming societies much earlier than others. They built villages, and their populations began to grow rapidly. Meanwhile, other regions were left behind. In New Guinea, for example, the main crop was sago, which was neither as nutritious as wheat nor easy to store. In the Americas, it took thousands of years to domesticate maize, corn. These societies didn't fall behind because of their lack of intelligence. It was simply the misfortune of their geography. This early advantage had profound and far-reaching consequences. Societies that adopted farming first gained thousands of years of head start over the rest. And instead of shrinking, this advantage only kept growing faster and faster. It was like a snowball effect. A small edge turned into an enormous gap over time. Farming freed humans from the constant struggle of finding food. And only when a person's stomach is full can their mind think about other things. That's when specialization began. New technologies were invented and large societies were built. But growing food alone was not enough. This food surplus triggered a chain reaction that transformed villages into cities and tribes into empires. How did that happen? We will explore this in the next chapter. Chapter 3. Empires built on grain. When the stomach is full, the world can be conquered. When a society has more grain than it needs, something extraordinary happens. Not every person has to remain a farmer anymore. Imagine a village where 10 farmers together can produce enough food for 20 people. This means the other 10 people are now free to do something other than farming. This is the birth of specialization. A blacksmith. A person could become a blacksmith and make better tools. Another could become a potter and make vessels. Someone else could become a soldier and protect the village. And another could become a priest or a king, organizing society. Go on. In hunter-gatherer societies, this was not possible because everyone had to spend their time every single day searching for food. There was no room for specialization. This food surplus directly led to higher population density. Where there was more food, more people could live. Small tribes now turned into large villages, and villages turned into densely populated cities. And when thousands of people live together in one place, they need a political system to control and organize them. This is where chiefs, kings, and governments emerged. Their job was to collect grain as tax, use that grain to feed an army, and then use that army to expand their state. A hunter-gatherer tribe could never raise a massive army because it didn't have a stable food supply to feed so many people. But an agricultural society could easily maintain a large army. And this is where the story of steel and guns begins. When a society has specialists, they begin developing new technologies. Some learn to work with metals and forge swords and armor from iron. Some develop the art of writing, which at first was used mainly to keep records of grain. Writing made it possible to pass knowledge from one generation to the next, which sped up technological progress even further. Societies with food surpluses were the only ones that could afford to feed inventors and craftsmen who built better weapons, better ships, and better buildings. Step by step, these societies advanced, from bronze to iron, and finally to steel. Steel swords were far deadlier than stone weapons. You can see how one thing is connected to another. It began with a few lucky plants and animals that made farming possible. Farming led to food surpluses. Surpluses increased population. Populations led to cities. Cities gave rise to specialization, which created rulers, soldiers, and craftsmen. Together, these formed complex political structures, empires, and it was these empires that developed powerful technologies such as steel weapons and, later, guns. It was a domino effect whose first tile had fallen thousands of years earlier in the Fertile Crescent. Now compare this picture with societies that didn't have these early advantages. In the Americas or Australia, people remained divided into small groups. Without large-scale farming, they couldn't feed big populations. Without domestic animals, all labor had to be done by hand. As a result, they never developed huge cities or empires. They had no writing systems, no advanced metallurgy. This doesn't mean they were less intelligent. It simply means their geography never gave them the opportunities that Eurasia had. So when Europeans arrived in the 15th and 16th centuries with their steel swords, guns, and horses, it was an unequal contest. In reality, it was the clash between thousands of years old farming societies and hunter-gatherer or early farming societies. The outcome was already decided. Guns and steel were not the beginning, but the final products of a deep process that had started long ago with farming. And they came into the hands of those societies whose the ancestors of Eurasia had won the geographic lottery thousands of years earlier. But the people of Eurasia had another weapon, one even more deadly than cannons and swords. An invisible killer that brought entire continents to their knees and made conquest far easier. What was this weapon, and what did it have to do with farming and domesticated animals? The secret is revealed in the next chapter. Chapter 4. Invisible Killers. The Reign of Germs. History's deadliest weapon, given to humans, not by humans, but by animals. When the Spanish conqueror Hernán Cortés arrived in the Aztec Empire with only a few hundred soldiers, he faced a powerful civilization of millions. Similarly, when Francisco Pizarro captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa with just 168 soldiers, he was up against an army of 80,000. By numbers alone, the European victory should have been impossible. Yes, they had horses, guns, and steel weapons, which certainly gave them an advantage. But that advantage was not nearly enough to defeat such massive populations. So what was it that made their victories so easy? The answer is germs. Europeans brought with them an invisible and deadly weapon against which the Native Americans were completely defenseless. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. Where did these diseases come from? Jared Diamond explains that all of them originally came from our domesticated animals. Smallpox was a form of a disease that came from cattle. Measles originated from dogs. Influenza came from pigs and ducks. For thousands of years, Eurasians had lived in close contact with their animals. They slept near them, lived among the filth, and because of this constant contact, animal germs learned how to infect humans. In the beginning, these diseases caused terrible devastation in Eurasia itself. Millions of people died over time. Those people whose immune systems could withstand these diseases survived, and they passed this immunity on to their descendants. After thousands of years of this process, the people of Eurasia had developed a natural shield against such diseases. And now imagine what happened when these same Europeans arrived in the Americas. The Native Americans had never domesticated large animals on a wide scale because such animals simply did not exist on their continent. Apart from the llama, no large animal was ever domesticated there. As a result, their bodies had never been exposed to germs like smallpox, measles, or influenza. They had no immunity, no resistance at all. When the Spanish conquerors came, they brought not only weapons, but also these deadly diseases. A single sneeze from a Spanish soldier could become a death sentence for Native Americans. The effects were catastrophic. A single smallpox epidemic wiped out more than half of the Aztec and Inca populations. Entire villages were depopulated. Armies perished from disease before they could even fight. The entire structure of society collapsed. People lost faith in their gods and rulers. Many believed this destruction was the wrath of the Europeans' gods. This devastation cleared the way for easy European conquest. They seized control over weakened and fragmented societies with little resistance. According to some estimates, within 1 or 2 centuries after Columbus's arrival, over 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas was killed by European diseases. It was the greatest population catastrophe in human history. So you can see that domesticated animals gave Eurasians a double advantage. First, they provided the power for farming and transportation, which allowed empires to rise. And second, they gave Eurasians not only deadly diseases, but also the ability to resist them. These diseases became a kind of biological weapon, which the Europeans, even if unintentionally, used with devastating effectiveness. Germs were the single most important reason why Europeans conquered American civilizations, and not the other way around. If history had been reversed, if the Americas had harbored deadly diseases and Europe had not, then perhaps the map of the world today would look very different. So far, we have seen how farming, animals, and germs gave Eurasia an unbeatable advantage. Together, these 3 elements gave rise to guns, germs, and steel. But one final and most fundamental question still remains. Why did all these useful things, these crops and domesticated animals, accumulate in Eurasia and not in the Americas, Africa, or Australia? Was it mere chance, or was there some deeper geographic reason behind it? The answer lies in a very simple but profound fact about geography, which we will explore in our next chapter. Chapter 5. The Shape of the Earth. How the layout of continents shaped human destiny. We have now arrived at the final and most important piece of our puzzle. We have already seen how farming and domesticated animals gave Eurasia an early lead, but the question remains, why was this advantage limited only to Eurasia? After all, farming was independently invented in other parts of the world too, such as the Americas and New Guinea. So why didn't those regions spread their technologies and ideas across the globe the way Eurasia did? The answer lies in the basic shapes and orientations of the continents themselves. Jared Diamond calls this the axis orientation of continents. If you look closely at a world map, you'll notice something very striking. The continent of Eurasia, that is, Europe and Asia. Eurasia is spread mainly east to west. It's like a wide biscuit. By contrast, the Americas and Africa are spread mainly north to south, more like a long biscuit. This may seem like a very simple geographic fact, but its consequences were profound. When you travel east to west, the climate, length of days, and seasons don't change very much. A crop that grows in Iraq can also grow with some adjustment in France or India because they lie along roughly the same latitude. This east-west axis turned Eurasia into a vast superhighway. Any new discovery or technology, whether farming, the invention of the wheel, or writing, could spread quickly across the entire continent. Wheat cultivated in the Fertile Crescent traveled thousands of miles to reach Europe and northern India. Horses first domesticated in China made their way to the Middle East and Europe. The exchange of ideas, technologies, crops, and animals was continuous, turning the whole Eurasian landmass into a vast innovation zone. Each society could learn from another's discoveries and improve upon them, which accelerated the pace of development many times over. Now compare this with the north-south axis of the Americas and Africa. Traveling from north to south means passing through very different climate zones. Corn cultivated in Mexico could not grow directly in the cold regions of North America, nor in the hot and humid Amazon jungles of South America. It took thousands of years for it to adapt to each new climate. Similarly, llamas domesticated in the Andes could never cross into the hot lowlands of Central America to reach North America. Deserts, dense jungles, and narrow land bridges acted as barriers, breaking these continents into many isolated zones. Here, the spread of ideas and technologies was extremely difficult. Each civilization had to develop almost everything on its own. Some societies had to start almost from zero. This geographic barrier was the main reason why development in the Americas and Africa was much slower compared to Eurasia. They simply did not have the opportunity to learn from one another or to share their discoveries. The wheel, for example, was invented in Mexico, but it never reached the Andes. Similarly, the Inca Empire's advanced metallurgy never made its way to the Aztec Empire. These continents were cut off internally. Australia's situation was even worse. It was a vast island, completely isolated. It had neither suitable plants for farming nor animals that could be domesticated. And because of its desert geography, its societies remained small and scattered. So the very shape of continents determined their fate. Eurasia's east-west axis made it a unified and fast-developing region, while the north-south axis of the Americas and Africa left them fragmented and slow to progress. This was not the result of anyone's intelligence or effort. It was simply a fact of the planet's geography. This was the ultimate reason, the final cause, that gave Eurasian societies all the advantages we discussed in earlier chapters, and in the end, allowed them to dominate the world. It is a truth that humbles us and teaches us that in our success or failure, many forces beyond our own abilities are always at work. Now all the pieces of the puzzle are in front of us. We have explored geography, farming, animals, germs, and the shape of continents. Now it is time to weave all these threads together and understand how they created the world we live in today. Let's grasp the essence of this entire story in our final conclusion chapter. Chapter 6. Lessons from History. Shaping the Future by Understanding the Past. So, once again, let us return to that jungle in New Guinea, where Yali had once asked Jared Diamond that simple question: why do you people have so much cargo? Now, after this entire journey, we are finally in a position to answer it. And the answer does not lie in any single factor, but in a long chain of interconnected causes. This answer completely rejects any notion of racial superiority and gives us the power to look at history through a new, more logical perspective. This story explains why the world looks the way it does today. It begins with geography. Around 13,000 years ago, when all humans were equal, the Earth was not. Eurasia was lucky to have wild plants and animals that could easily be domesticated. Grains like wheat, barley, and rice, and animals like cows, sheep, and horses. These were the magical raw materials that launched the agricultural revolution. This revolution happened first and fastest in Eurasia because its raw materials were the best. Farming ended the hunter-gatherer way of life and gave humans the ability to settle down in one place and produce more food than they needed. This food surplus was the spark that started everything else. When the struggle to fill the stomach was resolved, societies could sustain large populations. Large and dense populations gave rise to cities and states. This surplus food also created specialists, kings, soldiers, priests, and craftsmen, who did not farm but contributed to the growth of society. It was these specialists who developed new technologies, writing, metallurgy, and complex political organizations. From this foundation came steel, and later, guns. These powerful tools were created by societies built on agriculture. And then there were germs. Eurasians had spent thousands of years living alongside their domesticated animals. This gave them not only terrible diseases from those animals, but also the immunity to withstand them. When they reached other continents, they unknowingly carried with them these invisible biological weapons. The native peoples of the Americas and Australia had no such immunity, and these diseases wiped out more than 90% of their populations, making European conquest far easier. Finally, it was Eurasia's east-west axis that tied everything together and accelerated the pace of development. This geographic orientation allowed crops, animals, ideas, and technologies to spread rapidly across the whole continent, creating a vast and dynamic civilization. By contrast, the north-south axis of the Americas and Africa fractured their development with geographic and climatic barriers, slowing their progress. So, the answer to Yali's question is this. The difference in cargo did not arise from people themselves, but from the geography, plants, animals, and shape of their continents. And what should we learn from this entire story? The most important lesson is that we must see history as a chain of luck and chance, not as a tale of any race's inherent greatness. Jared Diamond's book teaches us humility. It reminds us that today's wealthy and powerful nations owe their position not to